Morning everyone, welcome to Meacham Field here in Fort Worth, Texas. Well, we're having a wander around the Fort Worth Aviation Museum today, and I've come across an absolutely amazing airplane, F5E. This is an F5E, it was part of the Aggressor Squadrons. This particular one is a movie star. It was the one that was in Top Gun, was painted black, it turned upside down, and Tom Cruise looked up, and when they were inverted he threw him the bird. This is the aeroplane he threw the bird to. We're going to have a bit of a look around today, lots more to see here.
One life for the revolution. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up. Rise up and
So the museum here has got lots of exhibits. We've got everything from a Corsair behind us here, which is fantastic. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. But it also has some pretty rare exhibits. Behind us here is a Thunder Chief. I don't think I've ever seen one of these in a museum that you can come up and touch like this. It's an amazing aeroplane. What I love about this aeroplane is actually the intakes and how the intakes are actually shaped and how the wing, it comes out of the wing and away from the fuselage. Actually, I find it quite beautiful, actually, an amazing piece of engineering. I mean, this was an aeroplane that wasn't in service very long, but really quick, and looks really cool, actually. So as many of you know, I grew up in Scotland. I lived near RAF Lucas, and the aeroplanes that I saw on a daily basis, which inspired me to join the Air Force, actually, were these aircraft behind me here. Not actually this variant, but the Phantom, the F4. 43 Squadron, Treble 1 Squadron at Lucas had these aircraft. I used to hear them roaring around, spey engines. Oh goodness, it was what really inspired me to join the Air Force. Unfortunately, they were all out of service when I joined the Air Force, and I ended up flying multi-engine. But today I see this and it takes me back to those days. So anyone who has seen the film Top Gun will recognise this aircraft. It's the F-14A Tomcat. It was the aircraft flown in Top Gun by the good guys, by Maverick and Goose, Iceman. They all flew this airplane at Miramar. This airplane replaced the F-4 for the US Navy. An amazingly capable variable geometry airplane as opposed to the F-4, which has fixed geometry. This airplane, Mach 2 capable almost. A variable geometry wing, which we see here. The variable geometry wing, 33 to 88% sweep. An amazingly capable airplane. 2 crew, pilot and a reel, which was the same as for the F4. 2 engines, again like the F4 for carrier ops. The thing that strikes me about this airplane, which is vastly different to the F4, is that the size of the engines and the thrust that they put out. This put out almost double the thrust of the F4. It also has a much smaller hook than the F4. The hook, to get it back onto the carrier, obviously they had to use the hook to catch the cables and stop the aircraft when it lands. As you can see, the hook on this one is actually very, very small in comparison to the massive hook that's on the F4. The other thing that strikes me about it, which you can probably see here, is actually there's not much to the back of this aeroplane. It's not very substantial, it's very thin, so just coming down there you can see all the way to the front of the aircraft. Just striking how thin it is. Nonetheless, an amazingly capable aeroplane, replaced by the F-18 really now on the carriers. Iconic. Made iconic really by the Top Gun film. Let's go and have a look at the F-18. So we talked a bit about carrier ops earlier, and the F-14 Tomcat replaced the, effectively the F-4 was replaced by the F-14. Later on, the F-18 turned up, the F-18 single seat fighter, one behind us here, actually in a unique paint scheme of the Blue Angels. This aircraft never saw active service on a carrier. It was purely used for the Blue Angels. Big difference between the F-14 and the F-18 on carrier ops is obviously the F-18 is single seat in this version. It did have a dual seat, the Growler version. However, no variable geometry wing. That was a big difference between the F-14 and this. And the reason for that was the advancement that we had in that time in lift devices to allow effectively an aircraft with greater power and better lift devices to operate off of a carrier. This had drooping leading edges, and as you can see at the back, massive lift augmentation from the large flap area, giving it a massive curved chord when it was coming in at a high angle of attack on the deck. Amazingly capable aeroplane, still in use now all over the world by numerous air forces, and still in use by the Blue Angels. However, it's a little bit newer than the one you see here. Lovely looking aircraft though, love this colour scheme. So you all know that I have an aversion to helicopters. They beat the air into submission and they get up in the air. This museum has a couple of helicopters, it's got a couple of Hueys, but it's also got this CH-53 Jolly Green Giant. An absolute monster of a helicopter. This one's a little bit special and we'll tell you about that later. But this helicopter was actually about the same size as, or slightly larger internally than a Chinook. I believe it produces similar power to the Chinook. Some people might tell me differently to that. However, it's really, this one's had all the insides taken out, but it's cavernous inside. I imagine it's quite noisy though, because I'm standing in the middle of the cabin here, and actually I'm directly underneath the main rotor head. So I imagine the vibration and noise in here is pretty hellish. It's got one main door there, which has a window. You'll have seen miniguns poking out of those in the past. It also has an emergency escape exit on the other side. As we come down, actually, this is a little bit, I think, a little bit bigger than the Chinook, but I haven't got much Chinook experience. But it is cavernous. It could take troops, you could put vehicles in here, it's got stretchers for an aeromedical role, you can drop paratroopers out of the back of this. An amazing utility helicopter. Big difference I noticed from the Chinook is on the ramp here. It actually has a proper ramp and door, so the ramp comes down, which is similar to Chinook, but when the Chinook ramp closes, on the bottom of the ramp here, the Chinook has a lip which just comes up to close the final part. The CH-53 actually has a proper door up here which comes down, which is very reminiscent of the Hercules. An amazing helicopter, but it is just that, a helicopter. I'm going to go and look at some aeroplanes because they're much safer, and I feel much more comfortable with them. But nonetheless, an amazing helicopter, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the outside of this helicopter and some of the amazing history that it has. Let's just go over here and have a chat. So we've come to the outside of the helicopter now, the CH-53, the Jolly Green Giant. This is a unique helicopter in that it was down by an RPG actually during the Vietnam War. It was hit 134 times with shrapnel from one RPG hit. You can see here actually every one of these small square panels is a patch that's been placed over some of the shrapnel hits. You can see that there are a lot of these panels on here. Not only on this part of the fuselage, but actually on the main part of the fuselage as well. Interestingly, after it was patched up, it was put back into service. This airplane flew about 150 to 160 missions after it was put back into service. But it did earn itself a really unique name after that: Patches. Back in the 80s, variable geometry wings were the thing. We had the F-14 Tomcat. In Europe, we saw the start of the Tornado. The Tornado was hugely successful in ground attack and the air defence role. But we did have these in Europe for a long time before the Tornado was around, actually. This was an Upper Hafer-based aircraft, US Air Force in Europe. It's an F-111, an amazing airplane. Actually, the first one I've actually seen in the flesh. Quite a sleek looking aeroplane at the front. This was one of the aircraft that was involved in bombing Libya back in the 80s. Amazing looking aeroplane. Bizarrely, it's an aircraft that had an ejection capsule rather than ejection seats. And when the pilots and the VO ejected, actually, they ejected in a dual capsule, which sent both of them out at the same time. I think this was unique in having that. I don't think I can remember any other airplane that had that kind of ejection system. Amazing looking airplane, very sleek lines with the wings swept back. So this museum does a lot of restoration, and we come into their covered area where they do quite a bit of the restoration. They've got a Bronco which they're restoring here. It was Bronco number 1. This was the first ever Bronco built. They're trying to restore it back to flying status, but as you can see, it's probably got quite a bit of a way to go. I did get excited for a millisecond because when I walked into this hangar, I actually thought that I'd found another Piper Cub for Arthur Williams, but actually it's not a Piper Cub. For the discerning of you will notice actually it's a bird dog, which was used for spotting. This one was actually used for spotting in Vietnam. It was the 7th bird dog ever made. Served with the army and then subsequently served with the National Forest Service for spotting forest fires. Again, they're trying to bring this aircraft back to flying status, but actually it's got a really long way to go. So this museum in Fort Worth is not just about airplanes, it's about forward air controlling. So it's a forward air controlling museum, and it focuses on forward air control and its development through actually through the Vietnam era and beyond. So it doesn't go back as far as World War II, but it also focuses not only on the forward air controllers but the aircraft that they controlled. You can see this airplane here, the Pushapula. We've seen the bird dog in the hangar over there, which was the original one. And then as we move on, they've got a number of Broncos here, and it is actually the largest museum and collection of Broncos anywhere in the US. This is a pretty modern one. How can I tell? Well, actually, not from the state you wouldn't think it, but actually it does have RWR MAWS fitted, or did have MAWS fitted on this aircraft, which would say that it's a fairly modern aircraft. They didn't have that kind of technology back in sort of the Vietnam era. So this airplane has flown, I would say, probably in about the last 10 or 15 years. This one's up and running, although it may not be airworthy just yet. They're hoping to have it airworthy pretty soon and start displaying it. They do display, I think there is a Bronco display in Europe, a Luftwaffe aircraft. However, I really love this aircraft. It looks amazing, sounds amazing as well. We haven't had this one running today, but I've had it running in the past. These are such a cool airplane. So it's really rare for us to get an insight into the research and development of modern military aircraft. Very often what doesn't work we never find out about, and what does work we don't find out about for years, such as the 117, the B-2, the stealth bombers. We never found out about those till many, many years after they were in service. They made an appearance publicly. Well, behind me, just over my shoulder here, which I'll show you in a second behind the fence, is an aircraft that was designed during the George Bush era. It was supposed to be a stealth aircraft that was for use on board carriers. This is the result of $1.5 billion worth of research. I'll try and give you a view of the aircraft. This aircraft was supposed to be a stealth aircraft that was going to be on board carriers. It was cancelled because it really didn't work, never came to fruition. Just looking at the aircraft, it does look very reminiscent of the ME-163, I think it was 162, the Comet aircraft. Looks a bit like that actually. 2 seats, delta wing, very stealthy looking actually. If you look just here, very clean lines, very like the 117 with angles to deflect the radar. Never came to fruition, was cancelled after $1.5 billion was spent on the project. They hide it away here. It's not actually owned by the museum, it's actually owned by a manufacturer who manufactures aircraft, the F-35 actually, at this facility. It's owned by them, we believe, and they've stuck it around here at the side of the airport to be hidden away. So this museum is really proud of its heritage here in Fort Worth. A number of aeroplanes were built here just at the Plant 4, which is just over the way here. One of those was the B36, the Peacemaker, an amazing aeroplane. It had, as you can probably see from the picture behind me, it had 6 rear-facing propellers. Props are just behind me here, 19 feet in diameter, these propellers, absolutely huge. And they've got a couple of wheels here. Now these wheels are pretty big. They're about the same size as my main wheel on my 747. In fact, almost identical in size, but actually these wheels are the little wheels here on the nose wheel of the B36. These were the smaller of the wheels on the B36. The larger wheel here, the main wheel, they were actually almost 9.5 feet tall. So if you can imagine a main wheel, which is, you know, probably 3 feet taller than me, 3.5 feet taller than me, these are huge in comparison. It just gives you a bit of a concept of how big this bomber was. The wing was about, at its widest, about 7.5 to 8 feet thick inside, so you could actually get in it and crawl around inside the wing. At the time, an utterly amazing piece of engineering. Was designed really only to do one thing, and that was to carry the nuclear weapons to the enemy, which at the time during the Cold War was the Russians, and this was their B-52 of the era. Was actually replaced by the B-52 actually in its role. Amazing. Turboprop, predominantly had, as I said, 6 turboprop engines with these propellers on it, but actually had two banks of 2 jet engines, very similar to the engines on the B-52. So when this aeroplane was taking off, it had 6 turning and 4 burning, which would signify that it had the 6 propellers turning and the 4 jet engines burning. You can see on the photo the jet engines are just here on the outboard of the propellers. Utterly Heath Robinson, but it worked.